The metallic click of the car door handle still echoes in my nightmares. One moment I was lost in Sawyer's kiss, his hands tangled in my hair, the windows of his Honda fogged with our passion. The next moment, cold October air rushed in as my husband Malcolm stood there, his face a mask of controlled fury I'd never seen before. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. "Get out of the car, Elund," Malcolm said, his voice deadly calm. His English teacher composure was intact, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the door handle. I scrambled to adjust my blouse, my lipstick smeared, my wedding ring catching the street light. Sawyer, my neighbor and personal trainer, had the decency to look embarrassed as he straightened his shirt. "Malcolm, I can explain," I started, but he held up his hand. "Not here, not in front of the neighbors." His eyes flicked to the curtains twitching in nearby windows. "Elund, go home, now." That was 6 months ago, 6 months since my world began unraveling, thread by thread, until I found myself sitting in a courtroom, watching everything I thought I deserved slip through my fingers like sand. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from the moment I realized my marriage had become a prison and I decided to find the key to my freedom. My name is Elund Greaves, and I'm 32 years old. I work as an insurance claims adjuster, spending my days dealing with other people's disasters, while my own life felt increasingly stagnant. Malcolm and I had been married for 10 years, together since college, and somewhere along the way, the spark had died. He was a good man, I suppose, steady, reliable. He taught high school English, came home every day at 4:30, helped our 9-year-old daughter Nora with her homework, and fell asleep watching Netflix documentaries about medieval history. Boring doesn't begin to cover it. I needed more. I deserved more. That's what my mother, Vivian Drake, always told me. "Elund, honey, you're too young and beautiful to waste away in that suburban tomb," she'd say during our weekly phone calls. "Malcolm's a nice boy, but nice doesn't keep a woman happy forever." Mom had never liked Malcolm. She thought I'd settled, married the first decent guy who'd proposed, rather than holding out for someone who could match my energy, my ambition, my zest for life. Maybe she was right. The problem started small. Malcolm would come home from school, exhausted from dealing with teenagers all day, and barely acknowledge me. He'd grunt hello, ask about dinner, and retreat to his study to grade papers. Our conversations became functional. Who was picking up Nora? What bills needed paying? Whether the gutters needed cleaning? I tried to spice things up. I bought new lingerie, suggested date nights, even proposed we take a couple's vacation to rekindle our romance. But Malcolm always had an excuse. Too tired, too busy, too stressed about the upcoming school year. "We have responsibilities, Elund," he'd say in that patient teacher voice that made me want to scream. "We can't just drop everything and run off to Paris like we're 22 again." But why couldn't we? We both worked hard. We deserved some happiness, some excitement. I was drowning in routine, suffocating in suburban mediocrity. That's when I started going to the gym. Initially, it was just about getting in shape, feeling better about myself. The endorphins from working out helped combat the depression that had been creeping in. But then I met Sawyer. Sawyer Neal was everything Malcolm wasn't. 31 years old, built like a Greek statue, with sandy hair and green eyes that actually saw me. He was a personal trainer at Fit Zone, the gym 3 blocks from our house, and when he smiled at me during my first consultation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt alive. "You've got great potential, Elund," Sawyer said, adjusting my form on the leg press machine. His hands were warm and strong, and when they brushed against my skin, electricity shot through me. "I can tell you're someone who doesn't settle for mediocre." He was right. I wasn't someone who settled for mediocre, so why was I doing exactly that in my marriage? Our training sessions became the highlight of my week. Sawyer pushed me physically, but more than that, he listened to me. When I complained about Malcolm's emotional distance, Sawyer nodded sympathetically. "A woman like you needs someone who appreciates what he's got," Sawyer said one afternoon as we finished a particularly intense workout. "You're wasting away with that guy." I started staying later at the gym, sometimes grabbing smoothies with Sawyer afterward. We'd talk for hours about everything: his dreams of opening his own fitness center, my frustrations with my job, the books we'd read, the places we wanted to travel. Malcolm didn't seem to notice my extended absences. When I came home glowing from a good workout and stimulating conversation, he'd barely look up from his lesson plans. "How was the gym?" he'd ask absently. "Great," I'd reply, and that was the extent of our interaction. The flirting started innocently enough. Sawyer would compliment my progress, tell me how strong I was getting, how confident I seemed. He made me feel beautiful, desired, appreciated, all the things Malcolm had stopped making me feel years ago. "Your husband's a lucky man," Sawyer said one evening as I gathered my things to leave. "I hope he knows that." I laughed bitterly. Sometimes I wonder if he'd even notice if I disappeared. Sawyer's expression grew serious. His loss would be some other man's gain. The comment hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility. I started dressing better for the gym, taking extra care with my makeup and hair. I bought new workout clothes that flattered my improving figure. When Sawyer complimented my appearance, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced since my early dating days. At home, the contrast became more stark. Malcolm moved through our house like a ghost, focused on his students, his lesson plans, his grading. He'd pat my shoulder absently when he passed behind my chair at dinner, the kind of casual touch you'd give a roommate, not a wife. "Dad, Mom looks really pretty today," Nora said one evening, clearly trying to get her father to notice the effort I'd put into my appearance. Malcolm glanced up from his phone, where he was answering emails from parents. "Oh, yes. Very nice, honey." Then he went right back to his screen. I felt invisible in my own home. But at the gym, I was the center of Sawyer's attention. He remembered details about my day, asked follow-up questions about things I'd mentioned in passing, made me laugh with his stories and observations. "You light up when you talk about your work," he said one afternoon as we stretched after a session. "I bet you're amazing at reading people, figuring out what really happened in those insurance claims." He was right. I was good at my job, good at detecting when people were lying or hiding something. But Malcolm had never shown interest in the skills that made me successful professionally. The emotional affair began before the physical one. I found myself thinking about Sawyer throughout the day, looking forward to our sessions with an anticipation that bordered on obsession. I started texting him outside of gym hours, just friendly messages at first. "Hope you're having a good day. Thanks for pushing me so hard yesterday. I can definitely feel it today." He'd respond quickly, often with encouragement or jokes that made me smile. Our text conversations grew longer and more personal. He'd ask about my mood, my stress levels, my plans for the weekend. When I mentioned that Malcolm and I rarely did anything fun together anymore, Sawyer was sympathetic. "Life's too short to spend it with someone who doesn't make you happy," he texted. "You deserve someone who sees how special you are." I screenshotted that message and read it whenever I felt particularly lonely in my marriage. The first time Sawyer suggested we grab dinner after a workout, I hesitated. It felt like crossing a line, even though we were just friends. But when I got home that night and found Malcolm already asleep on the couch with a stack of ungraded essays on his chest, I decided I deserved some adult conversation and companionship. "Just as friends," I told myself as I texted Sawyer back. "What's the harm in that?" We met at the Bistro, a trendy cafe downtown that Malcolm would have dismissed as overpriced and pretentious. Sawyer had changed out of his gym clothes into dark jeans and a button-down shirt that showed off his physique perfectly. "You look incredible," he said when I arrived, and I felt a flush of pleasure at his appreciation. We talked for 3 hours, about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood in Colorado, his dreams of expanding beyond personal training, his love of hiking and adventure sports. I found myself sharing things I hadn't talked about in years. My college ambitions, my frustration with the mundane routine my life had become, my fear that I was wasting my youth and vitality. "You're not wasting anything," Sawyer said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. "You're just ready for the next chapter of your life." His touch sent warmth shooting up my arm. I should have pulled away, but I didn't want to. For the first time in years, I felt truly connected to another human being. When Malcolm asked where I'd been, I told him I'd grabbed a quick bite after the gym. It wasn't exactly a lie, just an omission of details. "That's nice, honey," he said without looking up from the essays he was grading. "Did you remember to pick up my dry cleaning?" That became our pattern. Sawyer and I would work out, then grab dinner or drinks afterward. I told Malcolm I was taking evening fitness classes or meeting my coworker Janet for girls' nights. He never questioned my stories, never seemed suspicious of my improved mood or my increased attention to my appearance. Sometimes I wondered if he'd even care if he knew the truth. "Your husband must be thrilled about your transformation," Sawyer said one evening, as we shared appetizers at the bistro. "You've become this confident, radiant woman. It's incredible to watch." I laughed bitterly. Malcolm barely notices. Yesterday I wore a new dress I'd bought specifically to get his attention. You know what he said? "Is that new? It's nice." Then he went back to watching his documentary about the War of the Roses. Sawyer shook his head in disbelief. "The man's an idiot. If you were mine, I'd tell you how beautiful you looked every single day." The comment hung between us, heavy with implication. "But I'm not yours," I said softly, though part of me wished I could be. "No," Sawyer agreed, his green eyes intense, "but you could be." That night, I lay awake next to Malcolm's sleeping form, Sawyer's words echoing in my mind. "You could be mine." The possibility both terrified and thrilled me. Malcolm snored softly, completely oblivious to the turmoil in the woman lying 18 inches away from him. When had we become strangers sharing a bed? When had our marriage become nothing more than a business partnership focused on raising our daughter and maintaining our household? I deserved more than this. I deserved passion, attention, appreciation. I deserved to feel alive. The next morning, Malcolm rushed through breakfast, barely acknowledging me as he gulped coffee and gathered his teaching materials. "Don't forget Nora has soccer practice at 4, I reminded him. "Right, soccer, got it." He kissed my forehead absently, the same perfunctory peck he'd been giving me for years. "Have a good day, honey." After he left, I sat at our kitchen table, staring at my phone. Sawyer had texted me good morning, along with a motivational quote about seizing opportunities. Such a small gesture, but it made me feel seen in a way Malcolm's routine goodbye hadn't. At work, I found it difficult to concentrate on insurance claims. My mind kept drifting to Sawyer, to the way he looked at me like I was the most fascinating woman in the world. My coworker Janet noticed my distraction. "You're glowing lately," she observed during our lunch break. "New skincare routine." "Just working out more," I replied, which was technically true. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. You look 10 years younger." That afternoon at the gym, the tension between Sawyer and me was palpable. Every casual touch as he adjusted my form sent electricity through my body. When he spotted me during bench presses, leaning over me with his strong hands ready to catch the barbell, I was acutely aware of his proximity, his cologne, the way his shirt stretched across his chest. "You're getting so strong," he murmured, his face close to mine. "I'm proud of you." Malcolm had never said he was proud of me. Not once in 10 years of marriage. After our workout, Sawyer suggested we skip the bistro and grab takeout to eat in his car. "Somewhere more private," he said, and my heart raced at the implication. We drove to a secluded overlook on the outskirts of town, our Chinese food containers balanced on the dashboard as we talked and laughed. The conversation flowed easily, but underneath it was an undercurrent of attraction that neither of us was bothering to hide anymore. "I need to ask you something," Sawyer said as we finished eating. "And I want you to be honest with me." I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Are you happy in your marriage?" The question hung in the air between us. I could have deflected, made excuses, tried to pretend everything was fine at home. Instead, I found myself telling him the truth. "No," I whispered. "I haven't been happy in years." Sawyer reached over and took my hand. "You deserve to be happy, Alund. You deserve to be with someone who sees how amazing you are." "It's complicated," I said, though my resolve was weakening with every second his thumb stroked across my knuckles. "I have Nora to think about, and Malcolm isn't a bad person, he's just not the right person for you," Sawyer finished. He was right. Malcolm and I had grown in different directions, become incompatible. We were staying together out of habit and obligation, not love. Was that fair to either of us? Was it fair to Nora to grow up in a house where her parents were merely coexisting? "I think about you all the time," Sawyer admitted, his voice low. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. You're incredible, Alund. Smart, funny, beautiful. You deserve someone who worships you." My heart pounded as he leaned closer. I knew I should stop this, should go home to my husband and daughter and try to fix my marriage. But when Sawyer's lips touched mine, all rational thought fled. The kiss was everything I'd been missing. Passionate, desperate, alive. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless. "I should go," I whispered, but I made no move to leave. "Should and want are two different things," Sawyer said, stroking my cheek. "What do you want, Alund?" I wanted to feel desired. I wanted to feel alive. I wanted to matter to someone. "I want you," I admitted. We kissed again, longer this time, hands exploring, windows fogging. For the first time in years, I felt like a woman instead of just a wife and mother going through the motions of life. When I finally got home, Malcolm was helping Nora with her math homework at the kitchen table. He glanced up when I walked in, flushed and disheveled from my encounter with Sawyer. "How was your workout?" he asked absently, already turning back to Nora's fractions. "Great," I replied, and it wasn't a lie. That night, as Malcolm fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had happened. I'd crossed a line, but instead of feeling guilty, I felt exhilarated. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Over the next few weeks, Sawyer and I met regularly in his car after our gym sessions. We'd drive to different secluded spots around town, talking and kissing like teenagers. He made me feel beautiful, desired, appreciated, everything Malcolm had stopped making me feel. "Leave him," Sawyer urged one evening as we sat in his car overlooking the lake. "You're wasting your life with someone who doesn't appreciate you." "It's not that simple," I protested. "There's Nora, the house, our finances. I can't just walk away from 10 years of marriage." "Why not? People do it all the time. You could be happy, Alund. We could be happy together." The idea was tempting, but also terrifying. What if I was wrong? What if I was throwing away a stable life for something that might not last? At home, Malcolm seemed increasingly distant. He'd always been quiet, but now he barely spoke to me at all. Our conversations were limited to logistics. Who was driving Nora where? What needed to be done around the house? When bills were due? "Is everything okay?" I asked one evening after he'd spent the entire dinner in silence. "Fine," he replied curtly. "Just tired." But something in his demeanor had changed. He watched me more carefully, seemed to notice things he'd previously ignored. When I came home from my evening fitness classes, he'd look up from his grading with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're out a lot lately," he observed one night. "I'm trying to stay in shape," I replied, which was partially true. "I thought you'd be happy that I'm taking care of myself." "I am," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. I told myself he was just stressed about work. Malcolm always got moody during parent-teacher conferences and report card season. It had nothing to do with me. My mother called one evening while I was getting ready for another workout. "You sound different, honey," Vivian said. "Happier, more energetic." "I've been exercising more," I told her. "It's amazing what regular workouts can do for your mood." "Good for you. Lord knows you needed something to perk you up. That husband of yours has been dragging you down for years." "Mom," I said warningly, though part of me agreed with her assessment. "I'm just saying, you're young and beautiful. You shouldn't waste your best years being taken for granted." Her words echoed Sawyer's sentiments, reinforcing my growing belief that I deserved better than what Malcolm was giving me. That night, Sawyer and I drove to our usual spot by the lake. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching under our feet as we walked to a picnic table overlooking the water. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him, "about leaving Malcolm." Sawyer's eyes lit up with hope. "And?" "I think you might be right. I think I've been settling for a life that doesn't make me happy." He pulled me into his arms, kissing me deeply. "You won't regret this, Elund. I'll make you happier than you ever imagined." As we made out against his car, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced since college. This was what life was supposed to feel like: passionate, exciting, alive. I was so lost in the moment that I didn't hear the footsteps approaching until it was too late. The car door opened with that terrible metallic click, and cold air rushed in as my husband stood silhouetted against the streetlight. "Get out of the car, Elund," Malcolm said in that deadly calm voice. My blood turned to ice as I scrambled to adjust my clothing, my mind racing for an explanation that might salvage this situation. But the look in Malcolm's eyes told me there would be no talking my way out of this. I'd been caught red-handed, and my carefully constructed double life was about to come crashing down around me. The ride home from the lake was the longest 15 minutes of my life. Malcolm drove in complete silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while I sat in the passenger seat trying to formulate an explanation that might minimize the damage. "Malcolm, please let me explain," I started, but he held up a hand without taking his eyes off the road. "Not now," he said quietly. "Not until we get home." My mind raced through possible strategies. I could claim it was just a moment of weakness, a mistake that would never happen again. I could blame our marital problems, argue that his emotional neglect had driven me to seek comfort elsewhere. I could even suggest couples counseling, promise to work on our relationship. But deep down, I knew none of those approaches would work. Malcolm had seen me making out with another man in a parked car like some teenager. There was no explaining that away. When we pulled into our driveway, I noticed Sawyer's car was already gone. He'd fled the scene the moment Malcolm appeared, leaving me to face the consequences alone. So much for all his talk about how much he cared about me. Inside the house, Malcolm's mother Gina was sitting on our couch with Nora, who was curled up watching a Disney movie. Gina looked up when we entered, her sharp eyes taking in my disheveled appearance and Malcolm's grim expression. "Everything all right?" she asked carefully. "Mum, could you take Nora to your place for the night?" Malcolm asked, his voice still eerily calm. "Elund and I need to have a conversation." Gina's expression tightened. She was 61 years old and had never particularly liked me, though she'd always been polite for Malcolm's sake. Now she looked at me with barely concealed disapproval. "Of course," she said, standing up. "Nora, honey, would you like to have a sleepover at Grandma's house?" Our daughter looked confused but excited at the unexpected treat. As Gina helped her pack an overnight bag, I caught the older woman's eye. "Gina, Not now, Elund," she said coldly, and I realized Malcolm must have called her before coming to find me at the lake. She already knew what he'd discovered. After they left, Malcolm and I stood in our living room facing each other like adversaries. The space that had once been our sanctuary now felt like a courtroom. "How long?" he asked simply. I considered lying, minimizing the timeline, but something in his demeanor warned me against it. "A few months," I admitted. "How long have you been sleeping with him?" "We haven't, we're not. It's not like that," I stammered. Malcolm's laugh was bitter. "Right. You just like making out with the neighbor in parked cars for the emotional connection." "Malcolm, please. I know how this looks, but..." "But what? But you were planning to tell me. But it doesn't mean anything. But it's somehow my fault for not being the husband you wanted." His accuracy stung because those were exactly the arguments I'd been preparing to make. "Our marriage has been over for years," I said, deciding to go on the offensive. "We're like roommates, not spouses. When's the last time you told me you loved me? When's the last time you even really looked at me?" "So that justifies this?" Malcolm gestured toward the door, toward the scene he'd witnessed at the lake. "Instead of talking to me about problems in our marriage, you decided to sneak around with some muscle-bound trainer." "At least he appreciates me," I shot back. "At least he makes me feel like a woman, instead of just a housekeeper and babysitter." Malcolm flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Is that really what you think? That I don't appreciate you? When's the last time you complimented me? When's the last time you planned a date night or bought me flowers, or did anything to show that you still find me attractive?" "I work 60 hours a week trying to provide for this family," Malcolm said, his voice rising for the first time. "I come home exhausted from dealing with teenagers all day, and yes, maybe I don't always remember to tell you how pretty you look or plan romantic gestures, but that doesn't mean I don't love you." "Love isn't enough," I said, and the words hung in the air like a death sentence. Malcolm stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something die in his eyes. The hurt, the anger, the desperate hope that we might be able to fix this, it all faded into a cold, analytical distance. "You're right," he said quietly. "Love isn't enough. Apparently, neither is commitment or loyalty, or the 10 years we've spent building a life together." "Malcolm, I want you to leave," he said. "Tonight. Go stay with your mother or get a hotel room, I don't care. But I don't want you in this house." "You can't kick me out of my own home," I protested. "I have rights. We need to discuss custody, finances." "We'll discuss those things through lawyers," Malcolm said. "But tonight, I want you gone." The finality in his voice terrified me. This wasn't going according to any of the scripts I'd imagined. He was supposed to fight for our marriage, beg me to stay, promise to be a better husband. Instead, he was dismissing me like a student who'd been caught cheating on an exam. "What about Nora?" I asked desperately. "She needs stability. We can't disrupt her life because of one mistake." "One mistake?" Malcolm's composure cracked slightly. "Is that what you're calling months of lying and sneaking around? One mistake?" "I never meant for it to go this far," I said, which was true. "It just happened. Sawyer made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. And that's supposed to make me feel better, that my wife found our marriage so unsatisfying that she had to seek excitement with the first man who paid attention to her. It wasn't like that," I protested, though it kind of was exactly like that. "Then what was it like, Alund? Explain it to me. Help me understand how the woman I married, the mother of my child, ended up making out with our neighbor in a parked car." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. How could I explain the loneliness, the feeling of being taken for granted, the desperate need to feel alive again? How could I make him understand that I hadn't set out to hurt him, but had simply been trying to find some happiness in a life that had become routine and predictable? "I was drowning," I finally said. "In our routine, in the sameness of every day. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter to anyone. Sawyer made me feel like I mattered." Malcolm nodded slowly. "And destroying our family, traumatizing our daughter, throwing away everything we built together, that was worth it to feel like you mattered." "I didn't think..." "No, you didn't think. You didn't think about anyone but yourself." His words stung because they contained more truth than I wanted to acknowledge. I had been thinking primarily about my own happiness, my own needs, my own desires. But wasn't I entitled to that? Wasn't I allowed to want more from life than endless loads of laundry and parent-teacher conferences? I'm not the only one to blame here, I said, my voice rising. You checked out of this marriage years ago. You stopped seeing me as a woman and started treating me like a fixture in your life. Maybe if you'd paid half as much attention to me as you do to your students, none of this would have happened. So this is my fault, Malcolm said flatly. I'm not saying it's your fault, but you're not blameless either. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, but I felt like a single parent for years. A single parent who had the luxury of a partner handling half the financial responsibilities, half the household management, half the childcare duties, Malcolm pointed out. But sure, you were completely on your own. That's not what I meant. I know exactly what you meant. You meant that I wasn't exciting enough for you. I wasn't romantic enough, attentive enough, passionate enough. I was just the boring husband who went to work every day and came home to help with homework and pay the bills. Malcolm, please. Can't we try to work through this? Maybe go to counseling? He laughed bitterly. Now you want to work on our marriage, after I caught you with another man. Where was this desire for counseling 6 months ago when you were feeling so lonely and invisible? I didn't have an answer for that, because the truth was, I hadn't wanted to work on our marriage 6 months ago. I'd wanted to escape from it. I want you out of this house in 1 hour, Malcolm said, walking toward the stairs. Take whatever you need for a few days. We'll figure out the rest later. And then what? I called after him. We just get divorced, tear apart our family, put Nora through the trauma of custody battles and divided holidays. Malcolm stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned back to me. You should have thought about that before you decided our marriage wasn't worth fighting for. As I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, I realized that my fantasy of leaving Malcolm for a more exciting life with Sawyer had just become a very real and terrifying reality, and I had no idea what came next. I spent that first night at the Hampton Inn on Route 9, staring at the ceiling and trying to process how quickly my life had imploded. The hotel room smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Malcolm's face, at the moment he'd opened Sawyer's car door. At 6 a.m., I called my mother. Elund, honey, what's wrong? Vivian's voice was thick with sleep, but she could hear the distress in my voice immediately. Malcolm found out about Sawyer, I said, and then the tears came. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Where are you? I told her about the confrontation, about Malcolm kicking me out, about spending the night in a hotel room that cost more per night than I usually spent on groceries in a week. That bastard, my mother said fiercely. He can't just throw you out of your own home. You have rights, Elund. You need to call a lawyer immediately. Mum, I was cheating on him. I don't think I have much moral high ground here. Nonsense. Marriage is complicated, and Malcolm drove you to this with his neglect and emotional unavailability. Any reasonable person would understand that. I wanted to believe her, wanted to accept her version of events, where I was the victim of Malcolm's inadequacy rather than the architect of my own downfall. It was certainly more comfortable than accepting full responsibility for the destruction of my family. Come stay with me, Vivian continued. We'll figure this out together. Malcolm will come to his senses once he realizes what he's losing. I drove to my mother's house in my pajamas and yesterday's makeup, feeling like a teenager who'd been caught sneaking out. Vivian lived in a tidy ranch house about 20 minutes from our neighborhood, close enough to be helpful with Nora, but far enough away to maintain her independence. She met me at the door with coffee and righteous indignation. I never liked that man, she declared, as she settled me on her couch with a mug and a box of tissues. Too controlling, too judgmental. He always acted like he was better than everyone else. He's not controlling, I protested weakly. He's just steady. Steady is code for boring, honey. You're 32 years old, not 92. You deserve passion and excitement and someone who makes you feel alive. Her words echoed Sawyer's so closely that I wondered if she'd been talking to him. The thought reminded me that I hadn't heard from my supposed lover since he'd fled the scene last night. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. "Have you talked to Sawyer?" my mother asked, as if reading my mind. "Not since last night. He left when Malcolm showed up." "Well, of course he did. The poor man was probably in shock. Give him time to process everything." But as the hours passed with no word from Sawyer, I began to suspect that his feelings for me might not be as strong as he'd claimed. It's easy to talk about leaving your spouse for someone when it's theoretical. It's much harder when that someone is suddenly available and the fantasy becomes reality. Around noon, my phone finally rang. My heart leaped when I saw Sawyer's name on the screen. "Elund, God, I'm so sorry about last night," he said, his voice tense. "Are you okay? What happened after I left?" "Malcolm kicked me out," I told him. "I'm staying at my mother's." There was a long pause. "Wow, that's big." "Yes, it is," I agreed, waiting for him to say something about how we could finally be together, how this was the opportunity we'd been waiting for. Instead, he said, "This is all happening really fast. Maybe we should take some time to think about everything." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, take time to think? I thought this was what you wanted. You've been telling me for months that I should leave Malcolm." "I know, but that was before. I mean, when it was theoretical, it seemed different. Now there's going to be lawyers and custody battles, and your whole life is going to be turned upside down. Maybe you should try to work things out with your husband." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Work things out? After he caught us together? After everything we've said about how unhappy I am in my marriage? "I just think maybe we moved too fast," Sawyer said. "Maybe we should step back and really think about whether this is what we both want." The coward was abandoning me. Now that my affair had real consequences, now that I was actually available, he was getting cold feet. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice rising. "You're just going to disappear? After months of telling me how much you care about me?" "I do care about you, Elund. That's why I think we should be smart about this. Let the dust settle. See how you feel in a few weeks." "In a few weeks, I'll be divorced and fighting for custody of my daughter. Thanks to you." "Thanks to me. I didn't force you to do anything. We're both adults who made choices." His casual dismissal of responsibility infuriated me. "You pursued me. You told me I deserved better. You encouraged me to leave my husband. And maybe you do deserve better, but maybe I'm not the answer. Maybe you need to figure out what you really want before you jump into something else." After he hung up, I sat in my mother's living room staring at my phone in disbelief. In the span of 12 hours, I'd lost my husband, my home, and my lover. The man I'd risked everything for was backing away the moment things got complicated. "What did he say?" my mother asked gently. "He wants to take time to think," I replied bitterly. "Apparently, he's not as ready for a real relationship as he claimed." "Then he's an idiot," Vivian said firmly. "But maybe it's for the best. You don't want to jump from one relationship into another without taking time to figure out what you really want." What I really wanted was to turn back time 12 hours and make different choices. But since that wasn't possible, I needed to focus on damage control. I called Malcolm's cell phone, hoping we could have a calmer conversation in the light of day. "What do you want, Elund?" he answered on the fourth ring. "I want to talk. About us, about Nora, about how we're going to handle this situation." "There is no us anymore," Malcolm said coldly. "And we're going to handle this situation through lawyers. I've already made some calls." My blood ran cold. "Malcolm, please. Don't you think we're moving too fast? Maybe we should try counseling first, see if we can work through this." "Work through what? Your affair? Your complete betrayal of everything our marriage was supposed to represent?" "It wasn't an affair," I protested. "We never slept together. It was just emotional support that got out of hand." "Right. Emotional support that involved making out in parked cars. I'm sure that's exactly how you'll explain it to Nora when she asks why Mommy and Daddy don't live together anymore." The mention of our daughter made my chest tight with panic. "What are you telling her?" "I'm telling her that Mommy and Daddy are having some problems, and need some time apart. I'm not going to poison her against you, if that's what you're worried about. Can I see her? Of course you can see her. She's your daughter, but it's going to be on a schedule, and it's going to be supervised until we figure out custody arrangements. Supervised? Malcolm, I'm her mother. I don't need supervision. You're also someone who's been lying and sneaking around for months. How do I know what else you've been dishonest about? How do I know you won't fill her head with justifications for why you destroyed our family? His lack of trust hurt, even though I understood it. I would never do anything to hurt Nora. You already did. The moment you decided your personal happiness was more important than your family's stability. After he hung up, I realized that my fantasy of an amicable separation was just that, a fantasy. Malcolm wasn't going to forgive me, wasn't going to make this easy, wasn't going to prioritize my comfort over his own sense of betrayal. I was in for a fight, and I was starting it from a position of significant weakness. Over the next few days, I tried to establish some normalcy while staying at my mother's house. I went to work, deflecting my co-workers' questions about why I looked tired and stressed. I called Malcolm daily, trying to negotiate time with Nora. I even drove by our house a few times, hoping to catch a glimpse of my daughter playing in the backyard. But everything felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. A week ago, I'd been a married mother with a comfortable routine. Now I was a separated woman, living in her childhood bedroom, fighting for access to her own child. The reality of my situation began to sink in when I met with the divorce attorney my mother had recommended. Linda Chen was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in family law, and she didn't sugarcoat my prospects. Adultery isn't grounds for divorce in this state anymore, she explained, but it can certainly impact custody and financial arrangements, especially if you can't prove that your husband was abusive or neglectful. He was emotionally neglectful, I insisted. He ignored me for years, took me for granted, never showed any affection or appreciation. Linda nodded sympathetically, but didn't look optimistic. That's going to be very difficult to prove in court. Do you have any documentation? Text messages where he was cruel or dismissive? Witnesses who can testify to his behavior? I thought about it and realized I didn't. Malcolm had never been cruel or abusive. He'd been distant and preoccupied, but he'd never called me names, or belittled me, or done anything that would look bad to a judge. What about the fact that he kicked me out of our home? I asked. You committed adultery. Many judges would consider that reasonable grounds for asking you to leave temporarily while things get sorted out. The meeting left me feeling more hopeless than ever. I'd expected the legal system to recognize that my marriage had problems, that Malcolm bore some responsibility for driving me to seek affection elsewhere. Instead, it seemed like I was going to be painted as the villain in this story. That evening, my mother tried to cheer me up with my favorite takeout and a bottle of wine. Don't listen to that lawyer, she said as we ate Chinese food on her couch. She's just trying to prepare you for the worst-case scenario. Once Malcolm calms down and realizes what he's losing, he'll be more reasonable. But I was beginning to suspect that Malcolm knew exactly what he was losing and had decided it wasn't worth keeping.